Pokemon games are dying. And I don't mean that in a clickbaity BS sense. Well, I mean, my phrasing is obviously more provocative than perhaps it practically needed to be, but this is YouTube, and your attention span is fickle and fleeting, so don't blame me for having to choose sharp-toothed words to grab your attention. It's your fault as a viewer that clickbaiting works. Admit it to yourself, go on. Anyway, Pokemon is actually dying, and it's not a natural death. And the developers of the core series games aren't even at fault, although Game Freak's half-assed, frequently bordering on clownish incompetence as a developer doesn't help the situation. But no, I mean in a broader sense than just the technical and aesthetic failings of Game Freak's work, especially recently. No, I mean Nintendo are doing it. Nintendo are killing Pokemon, and it's unnecessary. It makes no sense, of course, because Pokemon is one of, if not the world's largest and most recognized intellectual properties. It is one of the best-selling game series of all time, but they're strangling it anyway. Hello again, I am Blunty, and in 2 weeks' time, on the 27th of March 2023, it will become impossible to make purchases on the Nintendo eShop services for Wii U and Nintendo 3DS. Which, on the surface, makes complete sense. Those platforms are dead themselves in any commercial sense, and from a business sense, even the cost of low-level maintenance modes, keeping their servers and infrastructures operating indefinitely is just not a practical choice to make as a business. I understand that. We all understand that. But of course, it's yet another example of what a lot of us were very concerned about all those years ago, as the console manufacturers moved towards download-based game libraries and the slow ongoing death of physical media. And of course, we're still very, very concerned about that because it's happening right now. Sooner or later, those services get taken away from us, the gamers. The game preservation argument is ongoing, fierce, and it's only becoming more and more of a relevant issue as more and more of this stuff starts to disappear on us. And of course, especially with Nintendo's legal team historically being so very aggressive about gamers taking game preservation into our own hands with modding, ROM dumping, emulation, and the like. It's like they're actively trying to destroy their own proud history of success. It's ridiculous. The library director at the Video Game History Foundation has turned the issue into an easily digestible set of graphics, specifically using Pokemon as an example, as such a prolific, popular, and long-lived title to illustrate the problem we're facing as gamers, as fans. Phil points out that once Nintendo closes the 3DS and Wii U eShops in a couple of weeks, 74% of all Pokemon games released in the US will be commercially unavailable in any form. In the breakdown of this data, there's a couple of small errors like Heart Gold and Soul Silver being missing and Stadium 1 and 2 being marked as available when they're not. They will be soon. They're coming to Nintendo's subscription service for the Nintendo Switch, but they're not here yet, so, you know. But besides those couple of little errors, the percentages remain unchanged and the point remains solid. Only a quarter of the Pokemon series will actually be available to legally obtain, certainly in any practical way. And by practical, I mean economically reasonable and convenient and safe, because there's two huge issues with getting physical copies of old Pokemon games. The first is, for many titles, the pricing has become outrageously high because, well, obviously Pokemon's a very important game series historically, and the price gouging for collectors is severe. The second problem is, a massive amount of time when you're buying these things, you are being ripped off with fake cartridges anyway. The fraud, counterfeit, and forgery issue with retro Pokemon games in particular is massive, and it does sometimes take a lot of work and an extremely keen eye and a fair pile of esoteric knowledge about how these things were stamped and the type of screws that were used and the stickers and the labeling to tell real from fake sometimes, and sometimes the fakes are very, very convincing. People are being ripped off by these frauds constantly, and it's vile. It's disgusting. It's gross. Taking advantage of people like that is just, ugh. Why are people like this? Why are humans like this? Oh my God. Now, of course, it's even more impractical, basically idiotic, to expect physical copies of these games to be in continuous production and available. So the only practical and legal option is to get them digitally. If that is even possible. because for many Pokemon games, it's simply not possible, and never has been. Either download versions never existed in the first place, or they did, but now they're gone, or indeed are about to go soon. And for the rest of them, will disappear inevitably. And Nintendo are notoriously just shitty, just really shitty at bringing stuff to their half-assed, sloppy as fuck subscription service for the Switch, despite them literally just running these things on emulators in the first place. Now, for some titles, it makes complete sense. Third-party stuff, the licensing gets a bit tricky or impossible sometimes. But for stuff they own, and they do own Pokemon, Nintendo, the Pokemon Company, and Game Freak are all joined at the heart. So gamers who want to enjoy these games either relive them once more, like me, or try them for the first time, for the younger amongst us, are left with no other option but to pirate and emulate, which, beyond Nintendo's game of whack-a-mole with ROM sites, is simply frequently dangerous, or at least risky. A lot of ROM sites and similar methods are fraught with dangers of malware and viruses and sleazy sites doing sleazy things with link farming and all that kind of crap, and even more flat-out fraud. Which means, of course, in a very practical sense, Pokemon and its own history and legacy is not just dying, but actively being throttled to extinction by Nintendo themselves. And that's just a massive shame, isn't it? Pokemon Ruby was released in November of 2002 in Japan. Back then, it was before globally synchronized releases were a nearly universal factor for gaming, and certainly not for Pokemon games. So the Western release happened on March 19, 2003 in the USA, April 3rd, 2003 in Australia, and Europe got it by July 25th, 2003. In any case, it means Pokemon Ruby, and its twin sibling of course, Pokemon Sapphire, are now, or soon to be depending on where you live, 20 years old. And that means, by most people's accepted definition, Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire are officially retro games. Hand up in the comments if you feel old. The term retro generally considered to mean at least 20 years old, but younger than 40, which is where the word vintage starts kicking in, and the word antique kicks in past 100 years old. We're not there yet with gaming. The point I'm strolling towards, though, is from time to time, I do full livestream playthroughs of older, and indeed retro, Pokemon games. It's so fun, and always so interesting to revisit these old memories, freshen up the perspective of how far Pokemon has come, lament old features that we wish were still here or would come back. Hey, Game Freak, give me my friggin' secret bases back. I love doing that, and I have a specially modified 3DS with a capture device built in so I can do it properly with real games. Some of which are indeed my original cartridges from back in the day, but sadly, about 15 years ago, I was moving interstate and the movers I hired had their truck break down, so they left it parked on a street overnight, where it was promptly broken into and 80% of everything I owned got stolen, including the vast majority of my game collections, which still hurts. So some of my current physical Pokemon games that I own, I've had to carefully reobtain over the years, striding through the minefield of frauds and counterfeits on the second-hand market. But I don't have my Ruby cart anymore, and indeed that is one of the Pokemon games that is unavailable digitally and always has been unavailable digitally. Pokemon Ruby, if you can find an authentic cartridge, isn't one of the more horrifically expensive ones, at least if you don't mind it being an incomplete without box and manual kind of deal, which I don't mind so much. I buy these things to play them, not as collector's items for the shelf. But finding an authentic one is the issue, and even if you do, there's a fair chance it's not properly operational because it, like many Pokemon games throughout that era, uses a battery in the cartridge to keep things like the real-time clock going so that daily events can actually happen. And the stuff like growth of berries works. If the battery's dead, berries just don't grow, they're frozen in time. Neither of these specific issues are totally game-breaking if they're gone, but it's hardly the authentic experience. And in the case of games with day-night cycles, it can indeed break some functionality because some stuff only happens in day or night. Now, the batteries aren't hard to replace, and they're not rare or expensive battery types. In fact, pretty cheap and easy to get, but you do have to disassemble the cart, desolder the old one, to solder in a new one, which is not a thing everyone's going to feel confident in doing. I can do it, and in fact I have done it before, but the point is, for me, right now, sitting here, mulling over the thought that doing a live-streamed Ruby playthrough as it ticks over into official retro status for me, which as an Australian happens in 3 weeks' time, the only practical avenue I have to enjoy this game is to pirate it and play it on an emulator. And while I'm not against emulation by any measure, in fact, I consider it a vital thing for game preservation, in fact, but if given the choice, I really do prefer to play my games legit. Purity-appropriate hardware, if possible, on original cartridges, which I do have a console modded GBA with a HDMI output port on it to make capturing and streaming legitimate carts easy. I've made a video about that if you like. I'll link it in the down below if I remember. So yeah, it's just disappointing. It's sad. It's depressing. As a fan of the Pokemon series for literally its entire existence on this planet, and I mean, when I started playing, there were only 2 games out, Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue. I am OG G1 son. So to watch its own history and availability to old and new players alike start to evaporate, start to disintegrate, and watch that happen in real time, it's really sad and unnecessary. And it makes me angry at Nintendo. I'm frequently angry at Nintendo because they make some really frustrating decisions with how they do their shit sometimes, don't they? But this one in particular, it never stops stinging just a little bit. Anyway, thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you as always to the patrons scrolling up above there. And, I don't know, if you're still here, drop in the down below what your favorite Pokemon game is, and if you can still play it legitimately.